Thank you so much, and welcome everybody to the Climate Center's webinar, Hydrogen's Role in the Clean Energy Economy. My name is Duran. I work for the Climate Center, and I'll be your MC here today. I just want to do a little bit of introduction before I turn it over to my colleague, Geraldine, who's going to frame this conversation in a slightly broader context. And then we're going to turn quickly to our phenomenal speakers who we have here today. In order to do this, I'm just going to share my screen real quick and give you all a chance to see what I'm looking at here. All right. Once again, my name is Duran. I work for the Climate Center. Several of my colleagues are with us here today, including Barry. And Barry, if you don't mind turning off your camera, that would be great. This webinar is part of this year's webinar series, Envisioning a Climate-Safe California, Stories and Solutions. Some of you have attended some of our previous webinars, and today we're going to be talking about hydrogen's role in the clean energy economy. I do want to just point out, it's good to acknowledge that this is a complex issue. There are many possible ways forward, and our speakers may not agree about everything. And so we think that's a wonderful place to start, to have an opportunity to look at different sides of this issue and different pathways forward. This webinar is really about the question, what is the role of hydrogen in the new clean energy economy? And we hope we'll be able to shed some light on that here today. I should point out that we do have more webinars coming up. Please make sure you're signed up for our e-news and you get the information. Our next webinar will be on how to scale up nature-based solutions on farms and ranches and natural and working lands. That will be on September 28th. Look for information on that in your inbox. I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors. These organizations and others support the Climate Center in all our work. So I just want to thank this broad range of companies and organizations: Renewable America, Peninsula Clean Energy, Calpine Energy Solutions, Sunrun, MCE, Sonoma Clean Power, the LA Department of Water and Power, River City Bank, Silicon Valley Clean Energy, and SunPower. As you can see, this broad coalition of different types of organizations that support the Climate Center really point to the cross-sectoral nature of our work and indeed the challenge that we face in creating a climate-safe future here in California. So I'd like to thank all of the sponsors. I'd also like to thank our promotional partners. And you can see here a list of nonprofit and community organizations that help spread the word. Some of you are here because of their efforts to get the word out. So we appreciate all of these organizations: Actera, Community Environmental Council, Clean Coalition, Climate Resolve, Grid Alternatives, Civic Well, and Joint Venture Silicon Valley, all of whom are promotional partners of the Climate Center. Really quickly, today's agenda starts with me. Very briefly, I'll be done in just a moment. Turn it over to Geraldine, who's going to give us a little bit of framing. Then we'll hear from Janice Lin of the Green Hydrogen Coalition, Sasan Sadat of Earth Justice, Dr. David Sabone of the University of Cambridge, who's joining us from the UK. Then we expect to hear from Senator Ben Allen from Los Angeles area. And then we'll have a time for Q&A. So please put your questions in the Q&A as they pop up. We will be tracking all of those and get to them at around 11 o'clock, where we'll have about 25 minutes for a robust discussion with all of our presenters. And I should point out, stick around for the end, because at the end, we're going to give you a chance to take action on this important subject. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. With that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Geraldine. Geraldine, the floor is yours to do a little bit of framing and give us a little bit of an idea. How does this particular topic fit within the context of the climate movement?
Great. Thank you, Duran, and welcome to all of our guests here this morning. I wanted to talk a little bit about our Climate Safe California campaign at the Climate Center, and also how hydrogen fits in with the larger schematic in terms of what we're trying to accomplish here at the Climate Center. The Climate Center is a think tank, do tank, nonprofit working to really move California faster and with more urgency toward climate solutions. We've had a key role in growing community choice energy statewide. But the challenge we have excuse me, is that although there have been some demands and requirements that have been put out by the United Nations to cut emissions dramatically and remove carbon, the current pledges from worldwide leaders only gets us an increase in emissions, which is not where we need to be. The climate reality that we're all living through with extreme heat, with weather changes, any number of climate changes literally are happening now, not 10 years from now. We're seeing the icebergs melt. I don't need to tell you all what's happening, you know. But some leaders are stepping up worldwide, including the EU, the UK, Denmark, Rhode Island, Washington State. And I included the city of Los Angeles because their GHG-free electricity is going to happen in 2030. And it'll be 100% by 2035. So it's happening both globally, statewide, and then as it relates to cities, they're also moving forward more rapidly than the state of California. The state of California is simply not there. We're not moving fast enough to get us to a climate safe future. So what we need to do is we have to accelerate our state goals for a carbon negative, equity positive solution for climate change. And the 2045 date is just too far away. We need changes now. So that is what our Climate Safe California campaign is all about. It's a campaign for rapid decarbonization. You can see the goal here. By 2025, we will have enacted bold policies required by science to dramatically cut emissions, start drawdown, and secure resilient communities for all by 2030. That's what we're working toward every day at the Climate Center. It is our main focus, and everything we do is related to this goal. But we're guided by principles. So as the statement, the goal said, we're based on the latest science. We want to ensure a just transition for fossil fuel workers, and we want to prioritize climate justice and equal access to climate solutions, particularly for disadvantaged communities that have suffered the major burden of environmental degradation. So what are the tools that we use? And this is where the hydrogen piece comes in. We have 4 major policy areas that we focus on. One is accelerating the phase out of fossil fuel development, production, refinement, and use. We want to scale up protection and conservation of nature and natural carbon sequestration, invest in community resilience, prioritizing frontline communities, and funding climate action with $12 to $20 billion a year from the state and leveraging private sector funds. This first piece, accelerating the phase out of fossil fuel development, production, refinement, and use, is where hydrogen fits in terms of our policy initiatives. We really want to move forward with clean fuels. And to the extent that hydrogen is considered a clean fuel, how it is developed and what uses it can have is something that is the focus of this hydrogen policy brief that was developed by my colleague, Woody Hastings. And when we circulate this document after the end of the webinar, this is a link to our hydrogen policy brief. I'll also put it in the chat. So if you want to see what the Climate Center's perspective is with respect to hydrogen, how it should be developed and how it should be used, particularly in heavy duty uses, you can get a sense of where we stand on the hydrogen question. So I hope that gives you a sense of where we are, and it gives you a sense of how this fits in with our larger policy initiatives. So I want to thank you for your time, and I'll pass it back to Duran.
Thank you, Geraldine. And I know Geraldine will be popping back on the screen towards the end to give you guys all an opportunity to take action on this. We're going to be talking about Senator Allen's SB 414. He is here with us. Welcome, Senator. Thank you so much. We will be turning to our other speakers. You'll be coming up at around 10:45. Before I move to our first speaker, I would like to urge all of you who have not yet done so to please consider endorsing Climate Safe California. Rob just dropped the link. There's over 2,100 businesses, elected officials, including congressional and state legislative leaders, business leaders, nonprofit leaders, and individual citizens like yourselves who have endorsed Climate Safe California. By doing so, you help put wind in our sails. So please take a moment, either now or at the end of the webinar, to click on the link that Rob just dropped, and you can endorse Climate Safe California and join those other folks at the front lines. Let's dig into the topic. We want to start with Janice Lin of the Green Hydrogen Coalition. Janice is the founder and president of the Green Hydrogen Coalition. She has many other accomplishments that I could talk about, but we're going to drop the bios in the chat so you can read them. We can give as much time as possible to our speakers. So Janice, why don't you kick us off? What is your perspective on hydrogen and green hydrogen and its role in fighting climate change?
Thank you so much. Is everyone able to see my screen?
I can see it. I see kind of a, there it is. There is your slideshow. Looks good.
Thank you. Thank you so much. First of all, I'd like to thank the Climate Center for inviting me to be here today. It's really an honor. I'm a huge fan of the Climate Center's work. And I'll just share with you the first time I heard about hydrogen, I too was a huge skeptic. This was back in 2010 when I was just starting the California Energy Storage Alliance. And it was through our work in storage in the power sector that got me interested in hydrogen. And it was around this question of how do we truly achieve 100% renewables in the power sector. And you know, back then I did some grid analysis even on California and realized that to get to 100% of the lowest marginal cost electricity, we would need some form of clean, firm, dispatchable power that would be multi-day, ultimately spanning over periods of months and seasons to store that renewable energy. And that's how I landed on hydrogen. So that's my short story. I'm hoping to share with you in 2016, I realized this. By 2019, started the Green Hydrogen Coalition, and I'm hoping today to share more of my journey and what we've learned since. So the presentation today is called Green Hydrogen, a key resource for a clean and just energy transition. So let me start with the why. Again, this was in 2016 that I had this epiphany that the way to get to 100% and really end our reliance on natural gas in the power sector was some alternative fuel to achieve clean, firm, dispatchable power. Remember, I was the executive director of the California Energy Storage Alliance at the time. And even to this day, there's no commercially available storage solution, you know, battery storage, even pumped hydro, even compressed air, that can achieve multi-day and seasonal storage. But it is an application that's very well suited for renewable hydrogen. Realizing this, and with the goal of 100% renewables, they said, you know what? If we can achieve this in the power sector and we can produce renewable hydrogen at scale and store it, then there's no reason that we can't use renewable hydrogen to go after deep decarbonization in every other sector. At that time, there was no nonprofit focused on solving for this equation, you know, really deep decarbonization of every sector and reimagining our energy ecosystem, because when you deeply decarbonize every sector, it's an opportunity to rethink the whole enterprise. And so our thesis from the beginning when we founded the GHC as a 501c3 was, one, this is, you know, motivated to fight against climate change. It's a mission-driven activity. And our approach is that we can produce and solve for how do you realize green renewable hydrogen at scale, really large scale for supply availability in a cost competitive manner so we can accelerate fuel switching away from fossil fuels. And Geraldine, I really love those principles and the policies you put forth a moment ago. Our point of view, and we started this in 2019, was the way to get there is you go big, go fast. That to get to scale, you need to simultaneously scale supply and demand concurrently, and importantly, so we can start implementing the needed infrastructure to achieve very low delivered cost. Let me talk about what we mean by that infrastructure. So since founding the Green Hydrogen Coalition, we've been studying this question of, is it possible and how do you do it? Our first initiative was High Build Los Angeles, and this was actually a hub development initiative that was started even before the DOE's Earthshot. And here, what we asked is a simple question: is can we achieve really large-scale, low delivered costs, say to the Port of Los Angeles? And what we found is that it is entirely doable with off-the-shelf, commercially available technologies today. And thanks to the recent federal policy, the IRA, and resulting production tax credit, we can even do it at under $1 per kilogram delivered. The bar chart on the right shows the end-to-end cost of this scaled vision. So this is like a point in time, say in 2030, about $2 per kilogram delivered. And this includes the production cost, the pipeline transport cost, compression, even the cost of producing the water for the electrolysis. So this is recycled water. At scale, it turns into a 69 cents per kilogram delivered at the pipeline, say in Los Angeles. This is very exciting because a kilogram of hydrogen has roughly the same energy content as a gallon of diesel. What this system requires to achieve that low cost is mass scale. So we were forecasting about 1 million metric tons per year delivered into the LA area. And secondly, to achieve that low delivered cost, you need a low cost transport system. So we found that it does require 100% green hydrogen pipelines connected to out-of-state salt domes, because you need to have a storage resource to balance the seasonal demand. And by the way, we have a much longer report, which I invite all of you to download for free online, and a webinar that summarizes a lot. There's much, much more behind this study. But in the interest of time, I do want to go over some of the benefits. By having green hydrogen available with supply certainty and at low cost, what we found is under a total cost of ownership scenario, we would see very rapid diesel replacement. So think terminal operators, fleet operators. Not every transport or diesel use would convert. We think a bunch of them could also, there's a number of use cases where the value proposition makes sense to go battery electric. But there's a very, very, very large diesel use in the LA basin that are high utilization, high capacity factor that lend themselves to switching from diesel to fuel cells with zero emissions. And what you see on the right is the modeled air quality impacts in a 4 kilometer by 4 kilometer region. The darker blue shows the reduction in smog under our high build LA green hydrogen adoption scenario. Those air pollution savings translate into many fewer deaths, fewer hospitalizations, fewer lost workdays. The model that was done looked at it monthly, and conservatively, if you multiply that, say, by 10, and by 2045, we think the benefits could exceed $3 billion a year, just in the community health benefits alone. Job creation. I noticed one of the principles of Climate Center is to make sure that fossil fuel workers have a transition into family-sustaining jobs in the clean energy economy. One of the amazing things we found is building this green hydrogen economy will more than offset job loss in the oil and gas sectors. What you see on the left is all the aspects of the infrastructure we forecasted, both direct and indirect jobs. Again, this is a scenario. It's not the only scenario. This particular study was focused on electrolytic pathways only, but I'll remind folks that the Los Angeles area has tremendous amounts of other waste, agricultural waste, municipal waste that serve as excellent feedstocks for the production of renewable hydrogen. When you add all this together and compare the jobs, about 28,000 jobs in total, to the current employment, and this is a 2018 fossil fuel jobs of 22,000, this is a really nice picture for economic development. I know there was a question in chat earlier. I can't see the chat anymore, but this question of like, well, is it battery electric? Or is it fuel cell? And what I want to encourage folks to think about is that green hydrogen is entirely synergistic with electrification, and encourage all of us to think about how can we do both? How can we massively electrify as much as we can while also deploying green hydrogen across the use cases where it makes sense to achieve more rapid reduction in fossil fuel use, not only for deep decarbonization, but to reduce pollution. And I'm really cognizant of time here, so I want to just say that when we think about the use cases where hydrogen makes sense, I'll just start because there was a battery electric question earlier. We think of it less in terms of, a particular sector, but rather more in terms of utilization. There may be passenger vehicles that are highly utilized. If you're a taxi driver, you don't really have a lot of time to charge your car, so a quick refueling may make sense. Secondly, in terms of heavy-duty trucking, where you have a high payload, long distance traveled, not a lot of downtime, that's where refueling and the very lightweight profile and energy density of hydrogen makes a lot of sense. There are other applications, maritime shipping, aviation. My original, where I got into hydrogen, was long duration energy storage, also known as the need for clean, firm, dispatchable power, and many, many industrial uses. This is not to say that we don't do electrification. We need as much electrification as possible. We need all of the above to go much faster. This is another chart that I want to share with folks to kind of frame the scale and scope of the challenge that we face when we think about fossil fuel use today. So it's a Bloomberg New Energy Finance chart that shows global energy consumption across all sectors in 2021. And the pinkish bar, orange bar at the bottom is electricity. Everything above it is molecule fuels. In gray are the dominant sources today, oil, coal, and gas. Their 2050 scenario, the economic transition scenario, shows what will happen even with a lot of electrification, unless we change policies. And that's why I'm so glad we're on this call today, because collectively, I think we can do something about this. There's another scenario in 2050 that they call it the net zero scenario, which has even more electrification. But even in this scenario, there's 55% of our global energy demand that has to be supplied in molecules. Some of it will be directly supplied by hydrogen, but there are many other liquid fuels that, it's just really hard to bypass. Long haul aviation is my favorite because it's really hard, to go the distance. You need lightweight. Anyway, if there's one thing that every country around the world has really studied this. Every country that's interested to study this on how do we wean ourselves from fossil fuels, if there's one thing they agree on, it's that green hydrogen, renewable hydrogen, has to be part of the mix. And one of the interesting things I learned on my journey, again, starting with how do you get to 100% renewables in the power sector, is that hydrogen not only can be used directly to displace certain fossil fuels, say through a fuel cell and a fuel cell truck, a fuel cell airplane, but with green hydrogen and a supply of biogenic CO2, we have the technology today to produce any type of liquid synthetic fuel for those applications that still require liquid fuels. So the epiphany was, wow, this little molecule is the common denominator to really truly ending our fossil fuel era. It's the thing we've always been waiting for. But how do we get started? Because getting started, we have this little chicken and egg problem. Renewable hydrogen is not lowest cost today. And that's where, the thesis of the Green Hydrogen Coalition is that we have to get to mass scale, low delivered cost. And we know that that delivered cost requires infrastructure, and that infrastructure requires scale. So we have sort of this chicken and egg problem. And, today, just as a data point, everyone's familiar with hydrogen fueling stations. At last I heard it was getting close to $30 a kilogram. Some years ago when it was at $15 per kilogram delivered, the rule of thumb was about a third of that cost is the fueling station, a third is the production of the hydrogen, the cost of the hydrogen itself, and a third is just the transport cost of compressing and putting that hydrogen on a truck and delivering it to the station. For perspective, yeah.
We're going to need to wrap.
Okay, I'll wrap really quick.
Yeah.
If we were to
you.
deliver it by pipeline, that cost would drop from $5 to about 20 cents. And so I'm just going to wrap up really quick and say, getting started to plan that infrastructure requires visibility into a large scalable off-taker. And we looked at all of these solutions: oil refineries, ammonia production, steel production. Unfortunately, in California, we don't do those things. And that's where I came full circle about clean, firm, dispatchable power. This is something, and we do have the leadership of cities like the city of Los Angeles. Clean, firm, dispatchable power is how we wean ourselves from natural gas in the near term. We'll be sharing this presentation. I'm sure I had a number of principles that are key to moving forward that underlies everything that GHC does, starting with environmental integrity, moving to the right. It is very important we achieve a just transition. And then I'll close out with just a few key recommendations for how we can collectively accelerate progress. One is a technology neutral definition for renewable hydrogen, provided it is done with environmental integrity and according to all standards and permitting requirements. We need to ensure that projects are deployed responsibly in partnership with communities. And finally, super duper important, shared infrastructure that can deliver low delivered cost will ensure faster switching away from fossil fuels. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Janice, and we appreciate everything. I just want to note any one of our speakers could certainly speak for much longer than the time we're allotting them. So I'd like to turn directly to our next speaker. What is green hydrogen? This question's popping up a lot in the chat and in the Q&A. Please keep those questions coming, but let's get some perspective from Sasan, who is Senior Research and Policy Analyst at Earth Justice. Sasan, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks so much. Thanks, everyone. Good to be with you all today. Let's see. Hopefully my share screen works a little better this time. Can you all see my slides?
Yes, you're still in presenter view with the notes. There we
How's
go.
that? All good now?
Yes, all good.
Awesome. Okay, yeah. So just to intro, my name is Sasan. I work with Earth Justice. And my colleague Sarah and I drafted this report called Reclaiming Hydrogen for a Renewable Future. And I can tell you a little bit about why, just to open, why we wrote this report. So I work on a campaign called the Right to Zero campaign. The goal of this campaign is to accelerate the transition off of fossil fuels towards zero emission clean energy in all sectors of the economy, in our buildings, in our industry, in transportation, and in the power sector. Earth Justice represents clients on the front lines of the most heavy pollution burdens in California. So adjacent to oil refineries, near gas power plants, communities on the front lines of industrial agribusiness, and the sector I work most closely in is communities on the front lines of the freight sector. So ports, warehouses, rail yards. So we've been working closely with our clients and partners, really under their leadership, to push for an end to combustion and an acceleration of direct electrification, or the elimination of combustion, however that may happen. In the time that we've been working in the past decade, it really felt that there was clear consensus, even if there was resistance to doing it by some industry operators, clear consensus that the clearest path to doing that was to rapidly electrify all these end uses so that they could plug into the grid and at the same time shift the grid towards clean electricity. We were surprised, though, sort of around 2018, 2019, to see the emergence of this sort of like debate, basically like, well, do you really have to electrify everything? Could we instead use renewable fuels like renewable natural gas or hydrogen? And we certainly were aware of hydrogen. It wasn't a priority for most of our partners or clients in their day-to-day fights against air pollution, but we certainly had hope that one day, maritime shipping or long-haul aviation we could carry sort of the bread and butter of the energy transition, which is super cheap renewables, into these tough corners of the energy transition, like maritime shipping. And we certainly had hope that, in the 2030s, ideally sooner, we could do that. But for now, we felt clarity that the project was to rapidly electrify as much as we could. And so we were surprised to see in the PUC and the CEC and CARB certain parties advocating for other pathways for prolong that could sometimes be misread, or at least by us read, to say we should prolong our reliance on gas infrastructure, on a sort of a molecule-based energy system, because we can actually just drop in clean molecules instead of dirty ones. And as we looked at the source for many of these claims, the hydrogen trade associations predominantly drawing their membership from oil and gas industries, the major oil companies, gas network operators, chemical companies, some of the laggard auto manufacturers that had been the slowest to electrify. And so we were really, as you can hear from what I'm saying so far, skeptical about the claims being pushed. And my colleague Sarah and I decided to prepare a report where we try to sift through oil and gas industry spin from zero emission solutions. So that's why our title of our report is Reclaiming Hydrogen. So we think it matters a lot to start the story about hydrogen in California's energy future with the story of what hydrogen is now today in the United States energy present. And certainly this is true of California too. Today, almost 98% of all hydrogen produced today is produced from fossil fuels, mostly from steam methane reformation of natural gas. And we use a ton of hydrogen already. It's not really a new energy source. It's actually being used all the time in oil refining, in ammonia production for fertilizer, and in a suite of other chemicals industries. Only this tiny little trickle you see at the bottom of this graph is hydrogen produced from electrolysis, a pathway that theoretically could be powered entirely by renewables and in a zero emission end-to-end fashion. So as a result, today, the global greenhouse gas footprint of hydrogen production is larger than the annual GHG emissions of the nation of Germany. And the bulk of this hydrogen production is not just a greenhouse gas threat, it's actually also a huge public health threat, because the bulk of the hydrogen demand in the US today is produced at or very near to oil refineries. And that production process also emits volatile organic compounds, NOx. In other words, it's adding to the local air pollution burden of communities living near refineries. So the status quo is we produce a ton of hydrogen, we use a lot of hydrogen, it's almost all made from fossil fuels, and it's a climate and health threat. And now let's talk about green hydrogen. So there's a lot on this graph, but I just want to go over it. So even green hydrogen produced 100% from renewables, that can also be a climate threat. And the reason we view that as potentially dangerous is that overusing green hydrogen could swallow more renewables to displace less fossil fuels, right? Because the process of making green hydrogen is so energy intensive, and because for now, we actually have only a finite amount of renewable energy we've successfully deployed on the grid, how much fossil fuel we displace with each given megawatt of renewable energy matters in the climate fight. If we siphon all that renewable energy and put it into an electrolyzer to then lose a lot of that electricity to energy losses to use in a fuel cell for a truck or a car or a train, that will get us less fossil fuel displaced than directly electrifying. And I think Janice did a really good job of explaining, there are places where direct electrification won't work. But there is a cost, I just want to emphasize, associated with overusing hydrogen. We see the risks there being basically as put in this really great quote from Agora Energy Vine. They're a German think tank, nonpartisan think tank. where they say in the short to medium term, the use of limited renewables for indirect electrification, in other words, for creating hydrogen and then using that hydrogen, stands in direct competition with its more efficient use for direct electrification. And therefore, they conclude it's critical to prioritize this for feedstock use in industry. So forget about using it for fuels for a second. We have all this existing hydrogen that we devote to oil refining, to ammonia production. And just the project of cleaning up this hydrogen is more than enough to keep our hands full, right? Like in this decade, just replacing fossil hydrogen with clean hydrogen, with green hydrogen, would be a mammoth task. And just to give you a sense of that, this is a slide that was presented at a CEC workshop recently. It shows, the annual estimated California refinery demand. So again, California refines a ton of oil. We use a lot of hydrogen for that refining. All of that hydrogen is produced from fossil gas. Just to displace that with green hydrogen, it's estimated it would take more than 2/3 of all the wind and solar we're expected to build over the next 4 years. Sorry, this is from 2022, so I guess in the next 3 years. I think that's a really important fact to convey, that every time you hear someone telling you we need to build this fuel cell car or this fuel cell, we need this hydrogen truck or this hydrogen train, ask them, what is your plan to clean the existing fossil derived hydrogen? Because every time we use, renewable hydrogen that we successfully produce from an electrolyzer in California for some other end use that could have been electrified, we wasted the opportunity to displace fossil hydrogen, which is something electrons can't do. We actually need a clean molecule, as Janice had said, for certain sectors, especially in feedstocks. Another feedstock example that I'd like to go over is ammonia fertilizer. Now, it's true, California doesn't produce its own fertilizer, but we use a ton of fertilizer and all across the Central Valley. Almost all of our fertilizer right now is imported from Russia. You can imagine, focusing our green hydrogen deployment by having distributed, decentralized electrolyzers at farms across the country or across the state of California, where we're producing our own green hydrogen on site instead of importing it. These are the use cases where we do think there's merit to pursue green hydrogen. But for now, Earth Justice's perspective, and the perspective we think many of our clients and partners share, is that hydrogen is being most vigorously advanced in the sectors where it is the most redundant or even sometimes inferior to the solution we already have, which does two things. One, it siphons limited climate dollars away from the solutions that have the largest potential to scale in this decade. And two, it creates doubt and confusion and debate over what the right pathway is for this decade, which we felt actually through a number of state commissioned reports, there was a lot of clarity on the project of the 2020s, which is rapidly ramp up renewable deployment and rapidly electrify as many end uses as possible. And now we're already seeing just in the politics, like at state agencies and in the legislature, sort of a vortex of attention being consumed by how we get more hydrogen, how we start being a leader in hydrogen deployment. And I understand, because, for the view that you want to be not behind the curve, you want to make sure you're investing in research and development of the technologies we need to get all the way to 100% fossil fuel free. Hydrogen absolutely will play a small role in that. But there's a risk that you kind of missequence your bulking order, your loading order of solutions. And I think the other thing I want to convey is, like, this is not just a potential or theoretical threat. Like, I work closely with partners at the ports of Oakland and the ports of LA and Long Beach, where our clients and our partners have been pushing for decades to require those terminal operators and those ports to transition to electrification, to transition to zero emissions. And they've been doing blueprints and planning documents and starting to invest in substation upgrades and starting to pilot this electrification technology and getting great results and hearing good things from the terminal operators. Obviously not frictionless, but we're seeing, the early steps of the transition. And suddenly we're hearing from many of the terminal operators, we've actually been approached by a lot of, fuel cell developers or by a lot of hydrogen refueling station installers, and we're really interested in this hydrogen thing. So we may actually not go forward with our electrification plan. We might actually wait or maybe test out. And it threatens to turn this decade of action into a decade of new pilots, of new testing different technologies. And from the point of view of just the end user, let's say the driver or the forklift operator, you can see how hydrogen is attractive, right? It's fast refueling time, it's liquid like diesel and gasoline, it's closer to what they know. But and Professor Sabone will be able to speak to this much more eloquently than I am. That's assuming you don't zoom out to look at the whole system. What does it take to get zero emission clean hydrogen to a port? It's going to be years before you can have a pipeline that can cheaply convey that hydrogen to that location. In the meantime, the practice has been you bring it in on tanks on diesel trucks. So you're tanking in hydrogen to a spot. Most of that hydrogen, as I said already, is produced from fossil fuels. And so there's this really real risk our clients are facing at the ports where electrification plans are deferred so that they can test out a technology that, once you look at it in a system's whole, really has no potential to eliminate fossil fuel use across the supply chain, not in the near term anyway. And again, it's diverting it away from the end uses that we know we needed in anyway. That's chemical feedstocks for oil refining, for ammonia fertilizer. And so our recommendation is really three things basically. And normally when I say this, I'd say it's like, just speaking for Earth Justice and best practice, I should say that, but actually the environmental justice community has done a lot of great work consenting around some of these principles. So it really, many of the environmental orgs in California have co-signed a letter with these principles reiterated to the legislature and to agencies. But roughly speaking, they are that green hydrogen requires additional renewable energy resources so that it doesn't cannibalize existing renewables. And that definition, requires what we subscribe to as like the 3 pillars of additionality, and we're happy to get into those as well. Second, that we need really robust guidelines for making sure we only focus the use of hydrogen in the sectors that are genuinely hard to electrify, that are genuinely no regrets end uses, so that we're not wasting this hydrogen where it's redundant or inferior. And third, we need really rigorous leakage monitoring, because it turns out hydrogen itself has a global warming effect in the way that it interacts with methane in the atmosphere. And so I think the most recent study I saw, June 2023, 6 different groups of scientists consensed that hydrogen has a global warming impact of 12 times carbon dioxide over a 100-year span and 36 times over a 20-year lifetime. And so we really want to make sure we don't replicate the warming effects of leaky infrastructure that we're seeing right now plaguing our methane carrying system as we build out this new hydrogen economy. So those are the sort of 3 principles we recommend as we move forward.
Thank you so much, Sasan. It's, again, fabulous content, excellent counterpoint with some of what Janice said. Obviously, you guys agree on a lot, but not on everything. We want to get into that a little more in the Q&A, but we have a couple more speakers. I'd like to invite Professor David Sabone to come on camera and join us. Professor Sabone is a professor of mechanical engineering at the University of Cambridge in England. Professor, are you with us? Here we are. Yes, thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. I just need to find my presentation wherever it's gone. There we go. Sasan, that was a great summary. Thank you very much for that. I really enjoyed your presentation. Really terrific. We obviously don't want to start at the end of my presentation, so I better go back to the beginning. Sorry about that. Oh, hang on a minute, this is the wrong one. That was the one from earlier today. So I'll get rid of that.
No problem. We do want to see the correct presentation, Professor.
We do indeed. It's been a very busy day. 2 conferences and an interview on the radio, and I'm struggling to keep up.
No problem. Well, we appreciate you joining us from so far away. Miracle of Zoom.
Indeed. Sorry. It is now messing up.
Okay.
First of all, I'll stop sharing. Let's just get ourselves. Okay.
While you're doing that, I'll just mention we've a lot of great questions that we hope to address during our Q&A period, but I would encourage all of our speakers who've spoken so far, Janice and Sasan, to go ahead and engage with these folks if you have answers to some of their questions. And Professor Sabone will just wait for your, here we go.
Sorry about that.
That's quite all right.
Completely confused. Anyway, yes. Well, it's one thing to have epiphanies, and it's another thing to have a bit of evidence. Like Janice's epiphanies, I like the idea of hydrogen at $2 a kilogram, especially since it costs $30 a kilogram now. And I like the idea of filling stations, pipelines to every filling station in California. That's a great idea. But let's have some evidence. The reason that we have the Hydrogen Science Coalition, which I set up with some colleagues a few years ago, here they are, is to try to put some evidence-based evidence into the discussion about hydrogen. There's so much hype and greenwashing going on in this space, and so many politicians taking the bait and setting up hydrogen, big hydrogen activities and huge hydrogen subsidies, which ultimately is the objective of most of the hydrogen industry. So we set up the Hydrogen Science Coalition. It has 5 principles, which are illustrated in this 5 little blobs on the right-hand side. I'm going to talk about 3 of them now. I'm not going to talk about the 2 that I've just blanked out. The first one is that we should decarbonize grey hydrogen first. And Susanne has really just stolen my thunder on that. Grey hydrogen is 2% of the world's carbon emissions. It's about the same as aviation. And we need to really start in the places where Susanne said where grey hydrogen is used as a chemical feedstock. And they are fertilizer, petrochemical processing, plate glass manufacture, maybe steel. And steel is a big one. Reduction of iron to make steel uses 8% of world, generates 8% of world carbon emissions. It's a huge, huge application. And what hydrogen is one of the ways to do that. So we should do that first. They are the high priority uses for hydrogen. We don't have any choice but to use hydrogen in these applications, and we need to start by cleaning that up. Hydrogen shouldn't be used to delay electrification. When electricity can be used instead of hydrogen, it's more efficient, it's lower cost, it's lower carbon emissions, it's always a more mature solution and quicker to deploy. And as, again, Susanne said, that should be the plan to electrify everything, to deploy renewables. That is the way to an energy efficient future where we have enough renewables to satisfy world needs and where we actually get off molecules and reduce our carbon dioxide emissions. Green hydrogen solutions need massive amounts of renewable energy generation. And if you use all that renewable electricity generation for green hydrogen, it means that you don't have that electricity available to light our lights, to power industry, to power electric vehicles. There's not enough to go around. Blue hydrogen solutions, which is what the fossil fuel industry is interested in, they are not clean at all. And it's vital that we don't launch down a path of generating hydrogen from more fossil fuels, which is just dirtier than what we started with. Let's take a little example. And there was an example in the chat about hydrogen for heavy vehicles. If we started with 100 kilowatt hours of renewable electricity from a wind turbine or solar panel or maybe a nuclear power station, if we transmitted by the electricity grid via AC, we lose about 10% perhaps, depends on the details. If we put that in and out of a battery, first of all, convert it from AC to DC, then use put it into and out of a battery. That's about 85% efficient. So we've now got about 77 kilowatts of our electricity. And then we put that into a battery electric vehicle through the electric drivetrain, and we end up with about 69 kilowatt hours of that electricity. So we started with 100. We've got 69 kilowatt hours left. This is pretty much any electric vehicle you care to choose. It's an electric car, an electric motorbike, electric scooter. It's an electric airplane. They all have this same set of efficiencies. So we wasted 30 kilowatt hours of energy. If we go by a hydrogen route, we take that electrical energy, we convert it to DC, we electrolyze water. That's about 75% efficient, the best electrolyzers today. We compress the resulting hydrogen and transport it. And compressing and transporting hydrogen by pipeline is very inefficient, only 80% typically transport efficiency. And then we take that compressed and transported hydrogen and we convert it back in a fuel cell to electricity again. And fuel cell has to satisfy the second law of thermodynamics, which says that it can't be more than about 50% efficient. And then we put that electricity in an electric vehicle. We end up with 23 kilowatt hours of electricity. That means we've wasted 77 kilowatt hours of electricity just as heat that we didn't want. So we need about 4 times more electricity to power the electric vehicle on the right. Sorry, I beg your pardon. We need about 3 times more to power the electric vehicle on the left than the hydrogen vehicle on the left than the electric vehicle on the right. The killer in this is the conversion in the fuel cell from work to heat, from a big pardon, heat to work in the fuel cell. And the message is that we need to electrify everything that we can, because we then get to use 1/3 of the amount of electricity. Let me just give you a quick example of how this plays out. This is a map of the United Kingdom. You've probably seen it before, what the United Kingdom looks like. If we were to power all the trucks in the UK with battery electric vehicles with electricity, we would need about 12 gigawatts of electricity all the time. If we were to power that same set of vehicles with green hydrogen, we'd need about 36 gigawatts of electricity, 3 times more electricity. So we need 3 times more wind turbines, we need 3 times more land area, we need 3 times more maintenance people and 3 times more spare parts, 3 times more grid connections. In fact, the cost of the green hydrogen powered trucking is 3 times the cost of electric trucking. And we know in the US, there's Tesla trucks with a range of up to 800 kilometers, 500 miles. There's no truck that does more than that in a day. So electric trucks are perfectly up to the job of doing battery-powered logistics. This is the problem with blue hydrogen. Blue hydrogen generates, this is a blue hydrogen manufacturing facility. The idea is you take gas, which has methane emissions, flared and vented and leaked in the supply chain. You combine it with hot steam. That generates carbon dioxide and NOx emissions. You ideally put some of the carbon dioxide down a hole in the ground, and you're left with hydrogen, which also leaks, and as Susanne mentioned, has a global warming potential of about 12 on a 100-year basis, which is a strange basis. 36 is a much better one. So the only low emissions hydrogen is green hydrogen. Blue hydrogen increases gas consumption by about 45%. That's why the fossil fuel industry loves it, because instead of its gas and fossil fuel market going away, which is what they can see, if they can promote blue hydrogen, that gives them 45% bigger market than now. And that's because hydrogen is a much lower energy fuel than the methane you make it from. When you make blue hydrogen, it releases somewhere between 10 and 50% of the carbon dioxide that you would emit if you just if you're making grey hydrogen. It generates high fugitive methane emissions, and it requires large-scale and absolutely non-existent carbon capture and storage facilities. The fossil fuel industry has been talking about CCS for decades. There are 2 CCS plants in the world that make blue hydrogen. Both emit about 50% of the emissions as if they were emitting grey hydrogen. There is no sign of blue hydrogen generation at scale anywhere in the world. Finally, using grey hydrogen generates significantly higher carbon emissions than burning fossil fuels. So if you fire up some hydrogen-powered buses, but you don't have any green hydrogen to power them with, then when you power them with grey hydrogen, it makes things absolutely worse than if you just use diesel in the first place. So you better make sure you've got a good supply of green hydrogen before you start a business to promote hydrogen-powered buses, hydrogen-powered trucks, hydrogen-powered trains, hydrogen-powered aircraft. You better make sure you've got a source of clean hydrogen. Green hydrogen is much cleaner, but as I showed you before, it requires a huge amount of renewable electricity. So why is all this important? It's important because hydrogen for heating and road transport is inefficient, will increase costs, will increase fuel poverty, and will damage economies. And anyone who thinks that they can power their economy with hydrogen and compete with any other economy that's running on electricity, they've got a lot to learn, and they will drive their economy into the ground. Any economy that runs on electricity will use way less energy and waste way less money in subsidies, government subsidies. Blue hydrogen will increase gas imports into the UK, that is. It will create high emissions, will damage our energy security. Energy security is much worse the more energy you have to import. Green hydrogen will require massive renewable electricity and will prevent decarbonisation of the electricity grid for the reasons that Susanne said. You need so much renewable electricity and that it's really not practical. And the fossil fuel industry knows that, and that's why they promote blue hydrogen. Hydrogen must only be used where there are no alternatives for fertilizer, for plastics, for glass, maybe for steel. It shouldn't be used for heating houses. It shouldn't be used for heavy vehicles. And sorry, Janice, it shouldn't be used for electricity storage either. It's incredibly inefficient for electricity storage, and it's a huge waste of money and energy to throw away 70% of your energy just because you want to store it. Confusion and uncertainty around hydrogen will delay international decarbonisation. Susanne explained about the confusion in the projects that he's involved with. We can see it happening all over the place. There's the international decarbonisation project is absolutely threatened by the drive to hydrogen, and we must be very, very careful about where it's used and how it's used for fear of wrecking the decarbonisation process. Thank you very much. That's all I got to say.
Thank you very much, Professor. I think we've heard some interesting points and counterpoints, which is kind of the point here. We want to have a robust discussion. I'd like to invite Senator Ben Allen. Senator, are you with us? I believe you are on the screen. Just want to make sure you're available at the moment. Senator, are you there? Well, while we wait for Senator Allen, oh, no, Sasan turned on his camera. I thought maybe you were the senator, but I see you are not. While we wait for Senator Allen, seems to have disappeared for a moment. So while we wait for the senator, and Barry, I would ask you to perhaps, Barry or Woody, to contact his team and see if he's still able to get back here. But I'd like to turn to some of our questions while we wait for the senator to return, assuming he's going to be able to do so. We have all the experts we need here to have a robust discussion. So Janice, I'm going to ask you perhaps to start. You began the conversation and used the term green hydrogen. And of course, we've heard some varying perspectives. So maybe perhaps we can just try and level set. Like, when you use the term green hydrogen, to what are you referring? How do we just differentiate that from blue hydrogen, gray hydrogen, dirty hydrogen, some of the other risks that we see? What is your framing for green hydrogen? I'll let you answer that very quickly, and then we'll bring in the senator. Hello, Senator. We're just going to have Janice address one question really quick, and then we'll turn to you. Janice?
Yeah, super quick. So it is true that hydrogen is a globally traded commodity. It is true that it's mostly made from fossil fuels. We loosely define green hydrogen as any pathway to produce the hydrogen that does not involve fossil fuels, quite simply, because hydrogen is everywhere. It's extremely ubiquitous, it's common, and we can make it from renewable sources.
Okay, well, we'll dig into that a little more during the Q&A. Senator Ben Allen, I'd like to welcome you to this webinar. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Much.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. And I got to tell you, I was listening to these wonderful presentations, and my computer fritzed out on me right as Professor Saban was winding down. And so I really do appreciate everyone's indulgence. Let me first say, my goodness, so much of what I was going to talk about, Sasan and Professor Shaban really did such a good job of articulating, and there's so many great things said earlier. I'm really humbled, quite frankly, by the extraordinary technical expertise and the depth of knowledge that the rest of the panel here has brought. This is such a complicated issue, and it's heartening to know that we have so many smart folks who are working on this from all over the world. I chair California's State Senate's Environmental Quality Committee. And I wanted to bring a perspective to this panel as somebody who thinks a lot about trying to protect California's people, our environment, and then, of course, our leadership on climate, making sure that trajectory continues. It's something we're proud of and we're very committed to. We've got such an enormous challenge ahead of us to decarbonize our economy, yet this challenge also offers so many opportunities to cement California's role as a climate leader. As was mentioned, we have so much to do, not a lot of time, and investing in the right tools now will be critical to meeting our ambitious climate goals while also protecting communities. So nowhere is this more true than in these current discussions over hydrogen. I just want to talk briefly about a number of the considerations that are happening in the state capitol and on the policy side, though I will say so much of it was really well described and discussed by a couple of the previous speakers. And then I want to talk a little bit about some consideration that we're looking at with the bill that's been mentioned a couple of times that I've been working on. As we've discussed, when used inappropriately, hydrogen has the potential to really slow down our efforts. It could even be harmful, as has been mentioned, in making progress toward our climate goals. I agree with this broader concern that if the use of renewable energy to make hydrogen is not properly implemented, and if we're really much more tailored in the way, that chart you just showed about the trucks in the UK, Professor, I think speaks to the potential pitfalls here if we're not really being careful and tailored and thinking critically about the application. We could be in a situation where doubling down on the wrong uses of hydrogen could dramatically increase greenhouse gas emissions, which is, of course, not what we're looking to do. And then that doesn't even get into all obviously all the issues we've talked about leakage and damage to pipelines if they're not properly designed. And then, of course, there's also concerns in environmental justice communities about how production activities and end uses could possibly burden nearby communities. So, there's from my perspective, it's just so important that we proceed really thoughtfully here. I'm focusing on three things I think we need to keep in mind. And once again, they're very much connected to previous presenters. We have to right size our hydrogen demand. We've got to minimize regrets in our hydrogen supply. And we don't have time to get this wrong. So how is the legislature grappling with these topics? Let's talk first about right sizing our hydrogen demand. There are a dizzying number of applications that we could use hydrogen for, but just because we could doesn't mean we necessarily should. We have a lot of sectors of our economy that we have to decarbonize, and we're going to need a lot of renewable energy and significant infrastructure. And of course, carefully considering the different decarbonization tools that we have for different applications will allow us to get the biggest bang for buck and make sure that we're bang for quid, I suppose, in the UK, and make sure that we're most effectively using our resources to minimize negative consequences to the environment and to our community. So we have a bill that's been mentioned, SB 414, and this bill would direct our state agencies, CARB, which is our Air Resources Board, that's been driving our climate and cap and trade system, and the California Energy Commission. So it directs them to assess the use of hydrogen for specific applications, including light, medium, heavy duty vehicles, aviation, maritime shipping, and industrial processes. And this would include analyzing greenhouse gas emission reduction potential, energy efficiency, the cost of using hydrogen compared to other decarbonization alternatives, evaluating potential health and environmental risks, including air pollution and leakage risk. And these data would then make it easier for policymakers to weigh out and just weigh our different options as we move toward rapidly decarbonizing and promoting technologies that offer the greatest benefit to the environment and to our communities. So our Air Resources Board is currently working on an evaluation pursuant to Senate Bill 1075. It was authored by my colleague, Senator Nancy Skinner, our budget chair. She's from Berkeley, Oakland area. It was signed into law last year. Basically, her bill will look at a variety of potential benefits and impacts of using hydrogen and how to scale up its use. Some of the most contentious discussions around hydrogen that we've been having in the legislature involve creating new, big, persistent demands for hydrogen. So, should we blend hydrogen into our gas grid? Should we earmark a significant portion of clean transportation program money for hydrogen, irrespective of the recommendations made by the experts who dispense that money? Should we redouble our commitment to expanding hydrogen vehicle fueling infrastructure, even a sales lag? So, we need to make impactful, long-range decisions based on all the imperfect information that we have in our bill, SB 414, by really doing a neutral, thoughtful, careful, deep dive analysis into all these issues we've been discussing today will help us make smarter policy decisions. Importantly, right-sizing our demand will I would think make our life easier for issue number 2 that I mentioned, minimizing regrets in our supply. So if we need hydrogen to power everything under the sun, we don't have the luxury of sourcing the cleanest molecules. But when we're using small amounts in more targeted applications, we can be more careful about where we source it. We spend a lot of time in the legislature making sure we get supply right. Everyone talks about the colors and the rainbow. We've been agonizing over, what kinds and colors of hydrogen best meet our goals. I mean, one of the points made just now was how inadequate nearly all of them are, including green, if you think about how energy intensive it could be if not done right. I mean, we do have ample, unlike the UK, we've got massive amounts of sunshine during certain times of the day. And there is the potential for the use of excess kind of free electricity that in some cases we're sending out of state to put toward hydrogen production. So maybe in that circumstance, that limited circumstances, it makes a ton of sense. These are all the things we have to analyze. Even if we agree to rule out fossil-free, even if we agree to rule out fossil fuel-based hydrogen, so the gray hydrogen, the blue hydrogen you were mentioning, there are a lot of definitions floating about, some of which are in statute, some of which are not. And different states have different definitions. So discussions continue about the role that biomass gasification should play, whether carbon intensity is a useful metric. The discourse around the production for tax credits under the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, to ensure greenhouse gas emissions are actually reduced, has made us realize that if we incentivize hydrogen, wrong, in an incorrect manner, we may not get the climate solution that we thought we were. So where do we go? I think it bears repeating that over 95% of the hydrogen we use today comes from fossil fuels. And if we just create new demands for hydrogen without any guardrails, we're just increasing demand for natural gas with just some extra steps. Now look, nobody wants the perfect to be the enemy of the good. And let me just say, electricity in so much of our country is being produced by fossil fuels. So, we know that we have potential for mass renewable energy sourcing of electricity, but it's not the reality on the ground in so much of the country and indeed so much of the world. So I get it. Let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I can appreciate that a true zero carbon hydrogen network isn't going to spring up overnight, but we do need to be very thoughtful about what we're investing in. Lots of money, lots of high dollar amounts are being thrown about. What are we incentivizing? And from my perspective, we got to make sure we're not setting ourselves up for more heartache after we've invested all this money, a few years down the road. So the complexity of all this underlies the importance of number 3. We don't have time to get this wrong. There's so many reasons to move quickly right now. I mean, the horrific scope of climate impacts that we're facing already for one, but also the clock is ticking for a state like us on the billions of dollars coming from the federal government through the Inflation Reduction Act. And as I'm sure everyone can appreciate, we're scrambling to ensure that we can do whatever we can to access that federal money, which, as has been mentioned in the chat, creates jobs, creates infrastructure. We're paying a lot of money to the federal government. We want to see some of that money come back. And ultimately, we also want we need the federal government's help to in our efforts to decarbonize our state's economy and minimize our contributions to climate change. But this stuff's really complicated, as we've been discussing. If done thoughtfully, how we use this federal funding can help secure our role as a climate leader in our state by demonstrating how hydrogen can responsibly and efficiently and effectively decarbonize certain sectors of the economy. But if we invest in the wrong solutions, we're only setting ourselves up further back. We're setting the wrong example. We're potentially making matters worse. We're creating infrastructure and jobs and investment and businesses and folks that are then going to want to pressure to maintain the status quo, which is a very serious political consideration that we have to be thinking about. So, doing hydrogen right means that we build out the needed infrastructure safely. Hydrogen can, of course, ignite more easily than natural gas. It's more combustible. Where we decide our economy benefits from decarbonizing with hydrogen, we need to make sure that each tank, each pipeline, each piece of the supply chain that serves is built to safe and reliable standards. Are we going to figure out hydrogen storage and transport before or after a deadly explosion? Anyway, I think if we work toward all of this, thoughtfully targeting hydrogen where it's most useful and ensuring hydrogen production and distribution is responsible, bringing in all the experts and all the perspectives we've heard today, making sure we're hearing from all of you and from the latest research, and making sure that your science continues to drive the process, I think that we can use hydrogen to decarbonize our economy without putting our residents, our environment, or our progress toward our climate goals at risk. But it's a tricky process, and I'm very engaged in this effort. And I just really want to thank Climate Center and these fantastic panelists for shedding a lot kind of additional light for me and for my team that's been listening on all the complexities of this important issue.
Well, Senator Allen, thank you very much for your passion, for your work on this issue. I'd like to invite all our speakers to turn their cameras back on, because we do have some time for some of the questions. You've all noted it's been a very robust conversation going on in the chat and in the Q&A. I wish we had time to cover everything, but we will have time to have a little bit of discussion. Janice, I want to thank you for your quick and succinct answer to my last question. I'd like to try and keep it that way. You said green hydrogen, hydrogen not made with fossil fuels. I'd like to invite Sasan and then David, Professor Sabon, to respond to that. Sasan, both from a straight climate perspective and from an environmental justice perspective, in your opinion and the opinion of Earth Justice, is that a sufficient definition of the kind of hydrogen that we should be using?
So I think it's a really good start, and being able to have industry partners that are some of the members of the Green Hydrogen Coalition make a clear stand against hydrogen from fossil fuels is super helpful. So I really appreciate their clear focus on that. But for Earth Justice and for our partners, we actually do need to go further. So the two ways I would say that is, for us, hydrogen production has to be end-to-end zero emission because we care about not just greenhouse gases, but also criteria, air pollution, about water pollution. And since we have a technology, electrolysis with abundant renewables, that's not only available, but actually the leading technology, the superior technology, the one with the greatest transformational potential, we shouldn't waste our time with resource pathways that require reformation and burning and combustion and gasification and pyrolysis and all these things that will have to be sited somewhere and create local harm in certain places. So for us, renewable electrolytic pathways are required. And then with that, in the electrolytic pathway, we're looking for adherence to clear additionality standards. For Earth Justice, we subscribe to the 3 pillars, which were laid out very clearly in a Princeton study done by Jesse Jenkins' lab of additionality, deliverability, and time hourly matching, which their study shows if you don't hold all 3 of those pillars, you do risk drawing on the grid and increasing the ramping of fossil fuel power plants to make up for the electrolyzer's enormous energy demand. And so that's why we think, green electrolytic and also the 3 pillars on the electrolytic side.
So we have to learn the phrase renewable energy-based electrolytic hydrogen. That's
or define green hydrogen to mean that. So that
right. So that's a mouthful. Professor Sabone, do you have anything to add? Like for you, what is the hydrogen that you would say, yeah, that's a good use, that's a good production, we need to deploy that? If any. You're muted, sir.
Sasan's definition was great, perfect. The 3 pillars, I absolutely agree with that. I think green hydrogen needs to be used in suitable applications. So put that green hydrogen manufacturer next to a fertilizer plant, and you've got my vote.
Excellent. Okay, that's good. I like that, succinct. Janice, I'd like to give you an opportunity to respond from the perspective of the Green Hydrogen Coalition. Are you fully on board with what our other guests are saying, or do you have a counterpoint that you'd like to offer?
Well, I'm fully on board. Love everybody on this call and the mission and the heart that you bring to the discussion. But I do have a slightly different point of view, and I think it comes from how we are looking at the issue. So, where to start? I'll start with just on the definition. Of course, we support additional resource and making sure it's clean and has environmental integrity. But when we look at all the other possible feedstocks, you cannot ignore that these feedstocks have negative impacts to communities today, whether it's organic, biomethane that's leaking into the atmosphere. I think 87% of California's methane emissions are from organic waste. Those can be captured instead of just flared or used to make hydrogen. We have literally billions of tons of forest waste that cannot be turned into furniture and is just, creating an issue and a potential fire risk. And what about the communities? I'm one of them that lives in a forested area, right? That it's unsafe. So we have to, I would encourage everyone to have an open mind and draw the box a little bit bigger, because hydrogen may be a way to mitigate some of the ill effects of these other problems. And on the efficiency argument, I'm a big fan of efficiency, but I would say that efficiency, you have to look at it not in a silo of just electric efficiency, but you have to look at system efficiency. What is the hydrogen avoiding in terms of liquid fuels? And remember that, and getting to Senator Allen's point of urgency, the longer this takes, that the default is combusting fossil fuels. And in the power sector, my background is in the power sector, to maintain reliability, you need some sort of clean, firm, dispatchable power to balance the grid. And if it's not hydrogen, it's likely going to be natural gas. And the final counterpoint I would have to say is, in our desire to electrify everything, we have to make sure we have reliability. If the grid goes down for whatever reason, that's not going to be good for anybody. And we have to make sure that the system, the electric system we have, can handle the envisioned electrification we all want. And from the analysis that we've done, that's going to be very difficult because the scale and scope of fossil fuels we use today is so large. In fact, the biggest barrier to connecting and using all the even proposed renewable large-scale wind and solar is grid interconnection. We have congestion. So the ability, and we're facing grid constraints. It takes a long time to build out the grid. The ability to build more incremental renewable energy, and instead of plugging it into the grid, you make molecules with it that can displace fossil fuels. That's a win. And that's why there are so many renewable developers interested in hydrogen today. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. And I can see a lot of continuing conversation in the chat. I do want to remind everybody the chat will be saved and shared with everybody. So all those links and everything else that got put in there, you'll have access to them. Senator, I'd like to turn back to you for a moment. Big box, small box, include this, include that. Your bill SB 414 is going to look at end uses. What do you hope that CARB and the Energy Commission will be able to draw from that? And how can that bill help set us up for perhaps right sizing our use of hydrogen in the green energy economy? You're muted also. There you go.
So sorry. Look, I think it's up until now, the process has been driven by special interests that go to individual legislators and try to form coalitions of legislators to push various things. Oh, let's get a budget play here. Let's get a bill in there. Let's have a hearing on this. And the legislators, we're all running around like headless chickens. I mean, we're working. I mean, literally, I'm going from this to a thing on transportation, talking about education reform and parks issues, and then insurance. What are we going to do with the FAIR plan and fires? I mean, it's just this never-ending stream of different topics that we're trying to grapple with all the time, and it's not easy. And so the legislature is very susceptible to the people who get in front of them, and the people who are best at getting in front of them are the folks who built a whole industry around getting in front of them, special interest lobbyists, etc. So the idea here is that we're going to really force our experts and the folks that we task with deep dive and thoughtful thinking to really do a deep dive and thoughtful thinking and grapple with all the things we've been talking about today, and really help guide us toward a data-based and science-based set of solutions. Because so far there's been this just train of a massive political rush toward hydrogen. And I just think that the moment demands a little bit more thoughtfulness, given all that we know, and that's been so well discussed today.
Thank you very much for that. In just a moment, my colleague Geraldine will pop back on the camera, but I'd like to give each of you a chance for a last word. Sadly, it's going to have to be in about 30 seconds. I feel like an NPR host. The music is going to start swelling in the background here. But I want to give you each just a last word. What's one takeaway that you want people to take with them? We're going to go in the order that you appeared in the webinar. So Janice, I'm going to turn to you first. What's one brief takeaway?
One takeaway is that I think we all want the same end goal. And I'd encourage folks to maintain an open mind. The longer it takes for us to have a meeting of the minds on the pathway forward, that's a win for fossil fuels, because remember, the default in every sector is massive fossil fuel use. And that's the thing we urgently need to fight. Thanks.
Thank you, Janice. Sasan, what's your one takeaway for everybody? 30 seconds.
Sure, yeah, and I'll just say, I'm really rooting for green hydrogen to work for these sectors of the economy that we know we can't directly electrify. But, I'm 28 years old. Over half of all greenhouse gas emissions have been emitted in my lifetime. Decades before I was born, Exxon and Chevron knew what their products were doing and lied to the public. We lost a decade to climate denial. We lost a decade to an all of the above energy strategy around natural gas and methane. And I'm really afraid of losing another decade to a debate about what the exact right solution to the climate fight is. So we need to be really clear-eyed about who is sourcing these talking points and what the risks are that they pose to our timed fight against climate change.
Thank you so much for bringing the voice of the next generation to the table. We appreciate it, and everything you say, both of you. I agree very much. Professor Sibon, what's your one takeaway?
Energy efficiency is what we need more than anything else. The single worst thing you can do for energy efficiency is to make useful electricity into green hydrogen unnecessarily. Because when you do that, you're forced to take the second law of thermodynamics punishment of 50% efficiency in a fuel cell. That means that hydrogen processes are inevitably waste 70% of energy. We need to be as efficient as we possibly can to minimize the amount of renewables that we need. That means we need to electrify as much as we possibly can, and under no circumstances should we use hydrogen for anything where electricity can be used instead.
Thank you very much. And Senator Allen, I'm going to turn to you for the final word, or the last word, as it were. Oh, still muted. Sorry.
Let me just thank the Climate Center for pulling this together. My takeaway is I want to get you guys in front of a number of the key decision makers in California, at CARB, at the Energy Commission, among some of the legislators as well, because I do think that we just don't have the space enough, and this is a problem in politics across the board. I think this was a problem with the federal legislation too. There's not oftentimes the time for real thoughtfulness, and so that's really what we need here. We need thoughtfulness. We need to kind of hone in on the professor's comments just now, as opposed to just rushing forward toward the shiny object. Let's be really careful. I do think I agree with Janice. I think we will find there is a meaningful role for hydrogen to play, but let's make sure that we're not making decisions now that we're going to regret by assuming that it's going to be the savior of every aspect of our energy future. And I think Sasan's absolutely right. We've lost so much time by chasing down gimmicks, and we've got to enter into this much more thoughtfully than we have so far.
Awesome. So we need to be thoughtfully rapid, or or cautiously eager.
That's the problem. That's the challenge. That's
right.
why it's difficult.
Well, thank you all. I'd like to ask Geraldine to quickly pop on the screen. What can people do about this? How can they support the senator's bill, Geraldine?
So some other folks from the Climate Center have already dropped this link, but if you are interested in supporting SB 414 or 414, which will direct state agencies to assess the health, safety, and environmental risks of hydrogen, as well as evaluate the energy efficiency, cost, and greenhouse gas reduction potential compared to other alternatives such as electrification. You can go to that link and send a message to your state assembly member in support of SB 414. It is in the Appropriations Committee, and they have to make decisions by Friday. So it was particularly timely if you take that action and do it today. Thank you.
Thank you, Geraldine. Thank you, Janice. Thank you, Sasan. Thank you, Professor Sibon. And thank you, Senator Allen. Once again, I invite you to stay tuned for our next webinar on nature-based solutions, September 28th. We're going to be talking with farmers and ranchers, different angle, same topic. Rapid action is required for a climate-safe future. I want to thank all of our speakers, and I want to thank all of you who attended and had so many great questions. I wish we'd had time for more of them, but it makes me happy to see how engaged people are. So thank you all for coming. Thank you all for being here. More importantly, thank you all for everything each of you do every day to help bring about a safer and more prosperous future for this golden state that we so love. So thank you all, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jerome.
I saved the chat.
Thank you, Geraldine.
I
I'll
don't know
see you.
where it went, but it's saved somewhere.
Okay.
Because a lot of people were asking for it. So it just tells me that the chat is saved. Let me do it again because there's more coming on. Okay, so it says chat saved, show in folder. Okay, I've got it.
Great.
So now we
Thank
have
you.
a debrief.
I will see you there.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.